U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima with 70,000 men facing 20,000 Japanese, hidden in tunnels beneath black volcanic sand. February 19, 1945. Dawn broke over the most fortified 8 square miles in military history. Private Jack Miller stepped off his landing craft, boots sinking into trembling earth as naval shells weighing 1,000 pounds each tore mountainsides apart. Above him, 800 warships unleashed hell. Below the cliffs, Lieutenant Colonel Tadamichi Kuribayashi moved through 18 miles of interconnected tunnels, rationing bullets among 20,000 defenders ordered to fight to the last man. The Marines carried flamethrowers, grenades, and endless ammunition. The Japanese recycled shell casings and counted every grain of rice. What happened when American industrial might met Japanese tunnel warfare? When democracy's production lines faced samurai determination? The answer lies buried in volcanic rock, written in fire and steel, where abundance battled scarcity in the most unlikely victory of World War II. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The black volcanic sand shuddered under the first landing craft, and Private Jack Miller felt the weight of his rifle and the weight of history pressing down. Dawn's light revealed jagged cliffs with tunnel entrances yawning like dark teeth. Overhead, warships fired shells that tore mountainsides apart. Some 800 vessels had been assembled for this moment. The Marines' boots sank into sand still trembling from bombardment. Every man had trained for months on simulators and beaches back home, but nothing could prepare him for the quiet menace of hidden tunnels beneath the cliffs. The scale defied comprehension. 70,000 Marines aboard landing craft approached an island measuring 8 square miles. Each square mile contained more defensive positions than most European cities. Artillery pieces emerged from camouflaged positions, fired once, then vanished back into rock. The volcanic terrain absorbed explosions like a sponge, channeling blast. Waves through underground corridors where defenders waited in darkness. Miller's squad leader pointed toward Mount Suribachi, its peak shrouded in smoke from the preliminary bombardment. 22,000 shells had fallen in the past 3 days, yet enemy fire continued from positions that should have been obliterated. The Marines understood they faced something unprecedented. Not just an enemy, but an entire island transformed into a fortress. Supply ships stretched to the horizon. Hospital vessels waited offshore, their medical bays prepared for casualties on an industrial scale. Behind Miller, ammunition crates stacked like city blocks contained more firepower than most armies possessed. The contrast would define everything that followed. Beneath Mount Suribachi, Lieutenant Colonel Tadamichi Kuribayashi moved through labyrinthine tunnels, counting rations and ammunition. His men, 20,000 strong, had been ordered to fight to the last man. Every hallway was a gauntlet, every ventilation shaft a potential trap. They fashioned booby traps and set concealed artillery, using scarce supplies with meticulous care. A single misstep could collapse a section of tunnel or waste precious bullets. Kuribayashi's mind balanced the impossible, holding the island to slow an industrial giant while protecting civilians trapped in the same network. The tunnels stretched 18 miles through volcanic rock, hand-carved over 8 months. 500 hidden gun positions commanded overlapping fields of fire. Artillery pieces mounted on rails could emerge, fire, and retreat into stone chambers within minutes. Ammunition stockpiles, carefully rationed, represented months of conservation. Each shell had been transported by submarine, each rifle bullet counted and recounted. Kuribayashi examined his forces with professional detachment. 20,000 men faced 70,000 invaders supported by the largest naval force in Pacific history. Mathematics alone predicted the outcome, yet mathematics failed to account for terrain, preparation, and the psychological impact of fighting from prepared positions against an exposed enemy. Air filtration systems drew fresh oxygen through volcanic vents. Underground hospitals treated wounded without exposing them to bombardment. Communication networks linked every defensive position through telephone lines buried in rock. The Americans would discover that conquering Iwo Jima meant fighting an enemy that could disappear and reappear at will. Kuribayashi's final inspection revealed defensive positions that transformed the island into a killing machine. His men would make the Americans pay for every foot of volcanic sand. Morning letters were written on crumpled notepads. Jack Miller's hands trembled, words failing to capture the scale of fear and anticipation. Kyoko Tanaka, a nurse, moved silently among wounded civilians, rationing water and whispers of comfort. Memories of home collided with the present. Iowa fields, Hiroshima's pre-war streets, distant factories turning steel into bullets. The Marines' rations and medical supply chain stood in stark contrast to the Japanese underground scarcity. Every moment, every meal, every first aid bandage was a thread connecting individual sacrifice to the larger war effort. Miller wrote to his mother about the volcanic sand that clung to everything, the sulfur smell that burned his nostrils, the sound of distant artillery that never stopped. He couldn't describe the industrial scale of the operation. Hospital ships with operating rooms larger than his hometown clinic, ammunition dumps that stretched for miles, fresh water produced by distillation plants that could supply entire cities. Kyoko Tanaka distributed rice portions to families huddled in tunnel alcoves. Each grain represented survival. Her medical supplies, bandages made from parachute silk, antiseptic diluted to last weeks instead of days, contrasted sharply with the American medical infrastructure visible through tunnel openings. Red Cross ships waited offshore with surgical facilities that exceeded most Japanese hospitals. The Americans ate hot meals delivered to foxholes. Japanese defenders chewed cold rice and saved every drop of water. Letters home from both sides would capture this fundamental difference: abundance versus scarcity, industrial democracy versus desperate efficiency. Dawn approached, and distant gunfire began. Hell was about to descend on 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The horizon erupted in smoke and steel. Naval bombardments had flattened bunkers. The roar of 9,000 rounds in the first hour rattled every bone. Marines advanced through water and sand, facing artillery fire and sniper shots from tunnel mouths. Explosions transformed the beach into an alien landscape. Every foot gained required coordination of infantry, tanks, and landing crafts. Tactical. Planning converged with brute force, showing American industrial scale in real time. Chandler Johnson coordinated the beach assault from his command post, watching waves of landing craft deliver men and materials with assembly line precision. Tanks rolled off LSTs directly onto volcanic sand. Artillery pieces, pre-sighted and preloaded, began counter-battery fire against hidden positions. The Marines moved with mechanical efficiency, each unit performing its designated function in a larger industrial process. Miller's squad encountered their first tunnel opening, a dark mouth in volcanic rock that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. Explosions echoed from deep underground, suggesting vast chambers and connecting passages. Artillery shells that should have collapsed these positions had instead been absorbed by volcanic rock, creating a honeycomb of defensive positions. The scale became apparent as the morning progressed. 1,000-pound shells from battleships created craters 50 feet across, yet enemy fire continued from positions that should have been vaporized. 22,000 rounds expended in the opening bombardment had failed to neutralize an enemy that fought from beneath the earth itself. Technical coordination reached unprecedented levels. Hospital ships evacuated, wounded within hours. Ammunition resupply continued without interruption. Communications networks linked every unit to Central Command. American industrial democracy displayed its fundamental advantage: the ability to sustain complex operations through systematic organization and overwhelming material superiority. Marines carried grenades, flamethrowers, and food at a scale unimaginable to their opponents. Tanks and bulldozers rolled forward, reshaping terrain to American advantage. Underground, Japanese soldiers rationed bullets, recycled shells, and conserved fuel. Flames licked tunnel mouths. Men crawled through collapsed rock to survive. Supply chains flowed like rivers. Hospital ships evacuated the wounded, ammunition resupplied daily, hot meals delivered at front lines. In contrast, Japanese rations lasted 10 days. The material disparity defied comprehension. American regiments consumed 50,000 rounds per day, more ammunition than the Japanese had stockpiled for the entire defense. Flamethrower teams advanced with fuel supplies that exceeded Japanese gasoline reserves for all vehicles combined. Bulldozers, operating continuously, moved more earth in hours than Japanese engineers had displaced in months of tunnel construction. Miller witnessed industrial warfare in its purest form. Artillery barrages, coordinated with naval gunfire, created firestorms that consumed oxygen from tunnel entrances. Engineering units deployed specialized equipment, tunnel fighting gear, demolition charges, ventilation fans, that transformed subterranean combat from nightmare into manageable tactical problem. Kyoko Tanaka treated burns from phosphorus shells that ignited everything they touched. Her medical supplies, gauze, morphine, surgical instruments, represented weeks of careful conservation. American medics carried more medical equipment in individual first aid kits than entire Japanese field hospitals possessed. The Japanese adapted with desperate innovation. Shell casings became grenades. Cooking fuel stretched to last months instead of weeks. Underground gardens grew vegetables in volcanic soil mixed with human waste. Every resource was multiplied through ingenuity and necessity. American abundance met Japanese scarcity in volcanic tunnels, where the outcome was predetermined by production statistics calculated in distant factories. The machinery of war was now visible in its full industrial glory. Explosions ripped through tunnels. Booby traps and hidden artillery turned corridors into death traps. Marines learned the meaning of subterranean warfare. Flamethrowers, demolition teams, and artillery combined to collapse tunnel networks. Kuribayashi coordinated with clockwork precision, shifting defenses to protect strategic points. Casualties mounted, yet the Marines' industrial abundance, medics, spare ammunition, continuous evacuation, kept the assault relentless. Every small victory highlighted the vast gulf between American abundance and Japanese scarcity. Miller's squad advanced through tunnels using tactics developed specifically for Iwo Jima. Flamethrower teams cleared chambers with napalm that burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Demolition specialists collapsed sections with shaped charges designed to channel explosive force through rock. Ventilation fans cleared toxic gases, allowing infantry to advance through passages that would otherwise remain impassable. The 18 miles of tunnels revealed Japanese engineering that transformed natural volcanic formations into integrated defensive systems. Chambers connected through passages too narrow for American equipment. Artillery pieces mounted on rails emerged from concealed positions, fired predetermined barrages, then retreated into rock chambers before counter-battery fire could respond. Kuribayashi's defensive coordination demonstrated military professionalism that earned American respect. His forces shifted between positions through tunnel networks that allowed tactical flexibility impossible in conventional warfare. Wounded Japanese soldiers disappeared into underground hospitals, emerging days later at different defensive positions. American material advantages overcame Japanese tactical innovation through sheer scale. 800 flamethrowers consumed, fuel supplies that exceeded Japanese reserves for the entire garrison. 12 tons of explosives deployed daily created seismic impacts that collapsed tunnel sections regardless of engineering reinforcement. 500 hidden gun positions fell to American firepower that simply overwhelmed defensive preparations through industrial abundance rather than tactical superiority. Flags rose atop Suribachi, signaling both morale and tactical accomplishment. Heavy firefights had secured the summit, revealing the island's strategic significance. Jack Miller's perspective blended awe and exhaustion. Chandler Johnson monitored casualties, tallying 27,000 Americans wounded or dead, 6,800 fatalities. Airfields now within reach, the island transformed from a rocky outcrop into a staging ground for strategic bombing campaigns. Symbolism and calculation converged. The flag raising created a moment of symbolic triumph that transcended tactical victory. Mount Suribachi's peak, secured after 3 days of continuous combat, provided observation posts that dominated the entire island. Artillery spotters directed naval gunfire with precision impossible from sea-level positions. The psychological impact on American forces was immediate and profound. Miller watched the stars and stripes unfurl against volcanic rock and realized the flag represented more than patriotism. It symbolized industrial democracy's triumph over totalitarian militarism. The material advantages that made victory possible traced back to factories, farms, and freedoms that sustained production on unprecedented scales. Johnson's casualty reports revealed the human cost of industrial warfare. 27,000 American casualties included 6,800 dead, losses that would have destroyed smaller armies. Yet hospital ships evacuated wounded faster than combat could produce them. Medical facilities treated injuries with techniques and materials that saved lives impossible to preserve in conventional warfare. The strategic significance became apparent as engineers surveyed airfield sites. Bombers based on Iwo Jima could reach Japan with fighter escort, reducing crew losses and increasing bombing accuracy. The island's capture shortened the Pacific War by months, justifying casualties through strategic calculation that balanced human sacrifice against tactical advantage. The flag atop Suribachi proclaimed victory achieved through abundance rather than martial tradition. Victory relied on relentless industrial might. Hospital ships treated hundreds daily. Ammunition and food flowed from factories, farms, and ports. Warplanes refueled for sorties from newly captured airfields. The operation was a living demonstration of democratic production, labor, logistics, and innovation converging in real time. Every letter home emphasized the link between individual courage and systemic efficiency. Johnson coordinated supply operations that revealed American industrial supremacy in quantifiable terms. 22,000 shells fired versus 20,000. Japanese defenders created mathematical relationships that defined victory through material abundance. Hospital ships treated 1,000 casualties per week, using medical supplies that exceeded Japanese reserves for the entire war. The logistical achievement surpassed the tactical victory. Supply chains delivered fresh water, hot food, and ammunition to frontline positions with reliability that seemed supernatural to Japanese observers. Communications networks coordinated operations across multiple time zones, linking Iwo Jima to production facilities in Detroit, shipyards in California, and training camps throughout America. Letters home captured individual perspectives on industrial warfare. Marines described equipment abundance that seemed impossible. Spare rifles, unlimited ammunition, medical care, superior to civilian hospitals. Their accounts emphasized democracy's fundamental advantage. Free peoples properly equipped could overcome any totalitarian military tradition. The contrast with Japanese logistics was absolute. Submarine supply runs, carefully rationed ammunition, and recycled equipment demonstrated efficiency born of desperation. American logistics demonstrated abundance born of democratic production that transformed individual farms and factories into military advantages. airfields under construction, would soon host bomber formations that could reach Japan with fighter escort. The island's strategic value multiplied through engineering capabilities that reshaped terrain to accommodate aircraft operations. Democratic production had created victory through systematic application of material superiority rather than martial tradition or individual heroism alone. Flamethrowers and bulldozers leveled tunnel networks. Explosives collapsed fortified positions, demonstrating the synergy of technology and human bravery. Kuribayashi adapted strategies in response, deploying last-resort ambushes, but American abundance, ammunition, manpower, and mechanical advantage overcame every obstacle. The island's small size belied the staggering volume of materials and men deployed. Technical innovation reached its peak in subterranean combat. 800 flamethrowers deployed napalm that burned through rock crevices, eliminating defensive positions through thermal effects rather than explosive force. Bulldozers operated continuously, filling tunnel entrances with volcanic rubble, while creating defensive positions for American forces. Miller witnessed technological solutions to tactical problems that demonstrated American industrial creativity. Specialized equipment, tunnel fighting gear, underground communication systems, ventilation equipment, transformed impossible military situations into manageable engineering challenges. Demolition teams used shaped charges that channeled explosive force through volcanic rock with surgical precision. Kuribayashi's final defensive measures revealed military professionalism that commanded American respect even in defeat. His forces conducted coordinated withdrawals through tunnel networks, concentrating remaining strength in positions that maximized defensive potential. Japanese tactical innovation demonstrated individual excellence operating within systemic limitations. American material abundance overwhelmed tactical brilliance through sheer scale. 12 tons of explosives deployed daily created seismic effects that collapsed tunnel systems regardless of engineering reinforcement. Ammunition expenditure, 50,000 rounds per regiment daily, exceeded Japanese production capacity for entire armies. The industrial democracy had proven its fundamental superiority through systematic application of material advantage. Individual heroism, tactical innovation, and military tradition had fallen to production statistics calculated in distant factories and implemented through logistical networks that spanned continents. Victory was near, but its cost demanded reflection on the price of freedom, measured in blood and steel. Silence followed the battle. 27,000 Americans had become casualties, 6,800 lay dead. Of the 20,000 defenders, only 216 were taken alive. Every shell fired, every ration delivered, and every life risked reflected the unmatched scale of American industrial democracy. This wasn't luck, it was deliberate, sustained application of production and strategy against a competent enemy. Johnson compiled final statistics that revealed the mathematical reality of industrial warfare. 22,000 shells fired by American forces exceeded the total artillery ammunition available to Japanese defenders throughout the entire campaign. Casualty ratios demonstrated material superiority translated into battlefield dominance. American industrial capacity had produced victory through abundance rather than tactical brilliance. The human cost demanded recognition alongside strategic celebration. 6,800 American dead represented individual sacrifice multiplied across families, communities, and regions that sustained democratic production. Each casualty connected to industrial networks that transformed civilian labor into military capability through voluntary participation rather than totalitarian compulsion. Japanese losses, 19,784 dead from a garrison of 20,000, demonstrated the futility of opposing democratic production with martial tradition alone. 216 prisoners represented the mathematical remainder of tactical excellence unsupported by industrial capacity. Medical statistics revealed American capabilities that seemed impossible to conventional military thinking. Hospital. Ships treated 27,000 casualties using supplies and techniques that exceeded most civilian medical facilities. Evacuation procedures saved lives that would have been lost in conventional warfare, demonstrating democracy's fundamental commitment to individual value. Mount Suribachi stood a silent testament to sacrifice and industrial might. The flag above volcanic rock proclaimed victory, achieved through systematic application of democratic production rather than military tradition, tactical brilliance, or individual heroism alone. Capturing Iwo Jima enabled airfields for B-29 operations, shortening the Pacific War. Bombers launched hundreds of sorties monthly, reducing risk to air crews and ensuring sustained pressure on Japan. Tactical brilliance and logistical superiority cascaded into strategic dominance, revealing how a single island shaped the larger war. Strategic implications multiplied beyond immediate tactical gains. Airfields constructed on Iwo Jima enabled bomber formations to reach Japan with fighter escort, fundamentally altering Pacific campaign dynamics. 500 bomber sorties per month became possible from the island's 3 operational airfields, creating sustained bombing pressure that Japanese air defenses couldn't counter. The mathematical relationships were stark. American bomber production exceeded Japanese fighter production by ratios that made air defense impossible. P-51 Mustang fighters, manufactured at rates exceeding 1,000 per month, provided escort capabilities that eliminated Japanese interceptor effectiveness. Industrial production had created air superiority through quantity rather than individual aircraft performance. Engineering achievements rivaled tactical victories. Airfield construction required moving volcanic rock using equipment that exceeded Japanese earth-moving capacity for the entire war. Runways capable of handling B-29 operations were completed while combat continued, demonstrating construction capabilities that transformed terrain faster than enemies could adapt defensive strategies. Strategic bombing campaigns launched from Iwo Jima accelerated Japanese surrender by months rather than weeks. Industrial targets, aircraft factories, shipyards, transportation networks fell to bombing accuracy impossible without fighter escort. The island's capture had transformed regional tactical victory into strategic dominance that ended the Pacific War through systematic destruction of Japanese production capacity. Victory at Iwo Jima reframed the Pacific strategy for modern understanding. Democratic production, properly applied through strategic vision and tactical excellence, had overwhelmed totalitarian military tradition through mathematical certainties rather than battlefield heroics alone. Letters, diaries, and survivor accounts emphasized individual courage and collective triumph. American democracy and production had proven deadlier than any tunnel, sword, or ideology. The battle transformed not only the Pacific campaign, but also the understanding of how industrialized society could wield war as a tool of liberation. The flag atop Suribachi endured as symbol of sacrifice, innovation, and the scale of human and material effort required to defend freedom. Miller's final letter home captured individual perspective on industrial warfare. He described equipment, abundance that seemed miraculous, unlimited ammunition, medical care superior to civilian hospitals, hot meals delivered to combat positions. His account emphasized democracy's fundamental advantage. Free peoples, properly equipped, could overcome any totalitarian military tradition through systematic application of material superiority. Kyoko Tanaka's diary recorded civilian perspective on American abundance versus Japanese scarcity. She witnessed medical supplies that exceeded Japanese hospital capacity delivered to individual soldiers. Food distribution networks that fed 70,000 Marines continuously contrasted with Japanese rations that lasted 10 days for 20. 1,000 defenders. Historical synthesis revealed patterns that extended beyond Iwo Jima to encompass democratic warfare's fundamental characteristics. Production statistics: 50,000 rounds per regiment daily, 22,000 shells expended, 800 warships deployed, demonstrated industrial democracy's ability to transform civilian capacity into military advantage through voluntary participation rather than totalitarian compulsion. The flag atop Mount Suribachi became eternal testament to sacrifice and industrial triumph. Individual heroism, tactical innovation, and military tradition had fallen to production calculations made in Detroit factories and Iowa farms. American democracy had proven its fundamental superiority through systematic application of abundance. Rather than martial excellence, creating victory through industrial might properly directed by free peoples defending their civilization against totalitarian alternatives. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The guns fell silent on Iwo Jima in March of 1945, but the echoes of that volcanic island reverberated across oceans and decades. What had begun as 8 square miles of fortified rock became a crucible where democracy's factories and fields confronted an empire's martial creed. When the smoke lifted, what remained was more than scorched earth. It was a redefinition of modern warfare, a testament to endurance, and a reminder of the terrible arithmetic of industrial conflict. For the Marines who survived, Iwo Jima never ended. They carried it home in their bones, in lungs scarred by volcanic ash, in dreams haunted by tunnels where the dead whispered. For Japanese defenders, few lived to remember, but their legacy persisted in diaries hidden in caves, in letters never delivered, in the image of a commander who chose duty over survival. For civilians caught in the labyrinth beneath Mount Suribachi, memory became both burden and anchor. They had seen the two greatest powers of the Pacific grind themselves against one another until only silence remained. The flag raised on Suribachi did not merely mark territory. It marked a shift in history. For America, it became an emblem stitched into the fabric of national identity, captured in Joe Rosenthal's photograph that immortalized not men, but the will of a nation. For Japan, it marked the moment when even the fiercest defenders, armed with tunnels and tenacity, learned that resolve alone could not withstand the tide of industrial abundance. Statistics alone cannot hold the weight of Iwo Jima. 27,000 American casualties, nearly 20,000 Japanese dead, 216 prisoners. Numbers become abstractions until they are anchored in faces. Private Jack Miller writing letters home that mixed exhaustion with hope. Kyoko Tanaka rationing bandages and water in a subterranean hospital. Chandler Johnson tallying casualty reports with hands that trembled beneath a veneer of command. Every figure represented a rupture in a family, a name carved into a stone monument, a story interrupted. The arithmetic of war reduces individuality to columns of loss, yet behind each digit lived the texture of humanity: fear, love, courage, despair. American Marines returned to farms, factories, and towns forever altered. Some built families, others battled invisible wounds. The industrial machine that had sustained them in combat could not always heal the fractures of memory. Veterans carried with them both pride and trauma, the pride of securing victory, the trauma of knowing its price. For the Japanese, memory was even more complex. The vast majority never returned. Survivors often spoke with reverence of Kuribayashi, whose refusal to waste lives in banzai charges preserved the honor of disciplined defense. Yet their children and grandchildren wrestled with the futility of sacrifice. What had those tunnels and those deaths achieved when the empire itself would fall within months? The scarcity they endured in the tunnels mirrored the scarcity their families faced in bombed-out cities, where even survival became an act of resistance. The capture of Iwo Jima reshaped the Pacific theater. Its airfields became lifelines for crippled B-29s returning from bombing raids over Japan. Historians estimate that more than 27,000 American airmen survived because they could land on Iwo Jima rather than ditching into the sea. In that sense, the Marine sacrifices purchased not just territory but lives that would return. Home to shape the post-war world, the island also accelerated Japan's decline. Bombers launched raids with fighter escort, reducing losses and increasing accuracy. The pressure on Japan's already strained production networks intensified. Factories, shipyards, and transport lines crumbled under relentless assault. Scarcity metastasized into starvation. Kuribayashi had succeeded in his grim arithmetic. He had cost the Americans dearly. But the battle also underscored the futility of resisting an adversary whose factories produced more aircraft in a single month than Japan could in a year. Iwo Jima proved that courage could not substitute for production, that tactical brilliance could not offset strategic starvation. The memory of Iwo Jima became layered with myth. In America, Rosenthal's photograph became an icon, reproduced in posters, stamps, statues. It crystallized the idea of Marines as indomitable, of democracy as inevitable victor. Yet for those who fought, the image told only part of the story. It captured triumph, but not carnage, symbolism, but not cost. In Japan, memory was quieter, tinged with mourning rather than celebration. Families preserved letters from sons who never returned. Shrines were dedicated to the fallen. Kuribayashi himself became a figure of paradox, respected by enemies for his professionalism, revered by compatriots for his devotion, and mourned as a leader caught between honor and inevitability. Kyoko Tanaka's imagined diary represents thousands of unheard voices, civilians caught between firestorms. Their survival stories remind us that wars are never fought solely by soldiers. Women, children, and the elderly endured hunger, fear, and grief beneath the ground, often invisible in official accounts, yet essential to the human truth of the Halama battle. Perhaps the deepest legacy of Iwo Jima lies in the confrontation between abundance and scarcity. The United States demonstrated what happens when a free society mobilizes its industries without reservation. Ships, shells, flamethrowers, bulldozers, and food flowed with assembly line precision. Japan demonstrated what happens when ingenuity must stretch finite resources to their limit. Bullets rationed, food measured in grains of rice, tunnels carved by hand into volcanic rock. This was not merely a contest of armies, but of systems. The battle revealed that democracy, with its decentralized factories and voluntary labor, could outproduce authoritarian regimes even in total war. Freedom had become a weapon as potent as any rifle, and yet the story does not conclude with statistics of production. It concludes with humanity, with the Marines who raised a flag, with the defenders who perished in tunnels, with the civilians who endured between. Industrial might decided the battle, but memory is preserved in the quiet resilience of individuals. For those who returned from Iwo Jima, victory did not always mean peace. Private Jack Miller, like thousands of other Marines, boarded hospital ships or transport vessels back to bases in Hawaii or California. The cheering crowds that greeted them could not imagine the reality of crawling through volcanic tunnels, of flamethrowers turning rock into ovens, of friends lost in seconds to unseen artillery. The United States embraced its returning heroes with gratitude, parades, and opportunity. Yet beneath medals and uniforms lay invisible wounds. Some Marines built lives of remarkable achievement, drawing strength from survival. Others battled nightmares, alcoholism, or the silence of men who could not speak of what they had endured. Post-traumatic stress had no name then. It lived instead in fractured marriages, sleepless nights, and sudden flashes of memory triggered by fireworks or the smell of burning. In contrast, the few Japanese survivors emerged into a homeland devastated by bombing, their society collapsing under the weight of total war. They returned not to parades but to ruins. Families grieved sons who never came home, fathers who had vanished into tunnels now sealed by rubble. Survivors often remained silent, their voices drowned in national mourning. To speak of defeat was to risk shame. To remember was to relive. The scarcity of tunnels, the sound of flamethrowers, rushing air from chambers. Kyoko Tanaka, if we imagine her survival, would have faced the dual burden of memory and rebuilding. She had witnessed the rationing of bandages, the cries of wounded, children, the moment when medicine ran out, and prayers were the only salve left. In post-war Japan, her skills as a nurse would have been desperately needed, but her memories would forever tether her to the island where scarcity shaped every choice. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi became a paradoxical figure in history. To Americans, he was the architect of a defense so formidable it left them with grudging respect. His refusal to squander lives in futile banzai charges saved thousands of Japanese soldiers for longer resistance, making Iwo Jima the bloodiest battle the Marines had ever faced. To Japanese citizens, Kuribayashi's reputation grew complicated. In a nation that prized death before surrender, his decision to emphasize attrition and tunnel warfare over suicidal charges was controversial. Yet his devotion to prolonging the defense earned him a reputation for pragmatism, even humanity, in an era of fanaticism. Letters to his family, preserved after the war, revealed a man torn between loyalty to emperor and love for his children, a commander bound by duty, yet deeply aware of futility. His strategy did not change the outcome, but it changed perceptions. Americans who fought through Iwo Jima often spoke of Kuribayashi with respect, even admiration. They recognized in him a professional soldier who fought not out of blind ideology, but with calculation and discipline. His ghost lingers in every account of the tunnels, an unseen presence, orchestrating defense long after his body was lost in volcanic ash. Iwo Jima marked more than a tactical victory. It symbolized the transformation of modern warfare. No longer would battles be defined solely by soldiers meeting face-to-face with rifles and bayonets. Instead, machinery, logistics, and industrial scale dictated outcomes. The island became proof of what could be achieved when production capacity was marshaled without limit. Factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Los Angeles had been as crucial to victory as rifles on the beach. Assembly lines, not just front lines, determined survival. For Japan, the lesson was devastating. Ingenuity and discipline could delay defeat, but not prevent it. The tunnels, carved by hand and defended with devotion, could not withstand bulldozers, flamethrowers, and daily barrages of 50,000 shells. Scarcity had met abundance, and abundance had prevailed. Back in the United States, the memory of Iwo Jima was crystallized in a single photograph. Joe Rosenthal's image of 6 Marines raising the flag atop Mount Suribachi became one of the most reproduced photographs in history. It captured something larger than the battle itself, the spirit of collective effort, the embodiment of democratic resolve. Yet the photograph also simplified the story. It suggested triumph without revealing cost. It immortalized the moment of raising the flag, but not the thousands of bodies lying below. For the families of the dead, the image was bittersweet, pride in sacrifice, mingled with grief that their sons had not lived to see the flag wave. The photograph inspired war bond drives, raised billions of dollars, and anchored the Marines in American mythology. At Arlington National Cemetery, the Marine Corps War Memorial stands as bronze tribute, a massive rendering of the flag raising, frozen in time. Tourists see victory in its silhouette. Veterans see ghosts. In Japan, Iwo Jima, known as Ioto in the Japanese tongue, became a wound both remembered and suppressed. The island was declared a sacred graveyard, its tunnels and beaches left largely untouched. For decades after the war, families traveled to memorial services, laying flowers at shrines built to honor the nearly 20,000 dead. Unlike the American memory, which celebrated triumph, Japanese remembrance was steeped in mourning. Survivors spoke quietly of Kuribayashi's professionalism, of the scarcity endured underground, of the inevitability of defeat. Yet the story was overshadowed by larger tragedies: Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Tokyo's firebombing. Iwo Jima was one among many catastrophes, but for those who fought there, it was the defining moment of their lives. Films, novels, and plays revisited the island across decades. In the 21st century, Clint Eastwood's twin films, Flags of Our, Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, presented both American and Japanese perspectives. They revealed the shared humanity of enemies, reminding audiences that courage and suffering transcended nationality. Even after the war ended, Iwo Jima remained an unfinished story. American forces retained the island as a military base, its airfields vital for decades. Japanese families pressed for repatriation of remains, and the process of recovering bodies from tunnels continued well into the late 20th century. Each skull unearthed was a reminder that beneath the volcanic sand still lay unanswered questions and unfinished grief. For veterans, anniversaries brought reunions where stories surfaced hesitantly. Men who had remained silent for decades finally shared memories with fellow survivors. Some visited the island in old age, standing once more on black sand where their youth had been lost. The island, silent and scarred, absorbed their tears. The Battle of Iwo Jima ended in March 1945, but its legacy stretched far beyond the volcanic island. When the casualty lists were tallied, nearly 27,000 American dead and wounded, nearly 20,000 Japanese defenders annihilated, the figures shocked leaders and citizens alike. Victory had been secured, but at a cost so staggering that even hardened commanders paused. In hindsight, the arithmetic appears brutal. 8 square miles of volcanic terrain, more fortified per acre than any battlefield. In history, purchased with tens of thousands of lives. The flag atop Mount Suribachi symbolized triumph, yet the ground beneath remained soaked in blood. For the Americans, the cost was weighed against the island's utility. The airfields provided refuge for crippled B-29s, saving tens of thousands of airmen. Strategic bombing intensified. By July 1945, hundreds of American bombers launched sorties monthly from bases strengthened by Iwo Jima's capture. Each raid carried its own grim toll on Japanese civilians, factories, and cities, but each also shortened the war's duration. For the Japanese, the arithmetic ended differently. General Kuribayashi had extracted a heavy price, but he could not change the outcome. His men fought with skill, courage, and ingenuity, but scarcity remained their greatest adversary. Against an enemy whose regiments consumed more shells daily than Japan could produce monthly, heroism could only delay the inevitable. Iwo Jima's deepest lesson lies in the confrontation between abundance and scarcity. America's democratic production lines, its factories, farms, and shipyards, had proven more decisive than any battlefield tactic. Each Marine carried food, water, ammunition, and medical support beyond what Japanese defenders could imagine. Each landing craft, each hospital ship, each flamethrower demonstrated the scale of resources a free society could mobilize. This was not merely logistics, it was a philosophy of war born of democracy itself. Citizens who voted, who owned factories, who worked farms voluntarily, had built a system capable of producing staggering abundance. Unlike authoritarian regimes that relied on compulsion and sacrifice, American democracy relied on participation. Its abundance became both weapon and shield. Scarcity shaped the Japanese response. Soldiers rationed bullets, families rationed rice, commanders measured every gallon of fuel. Kuribayashi's tunnels embodied this ethos, a fortress carved by human labor in the absence of machines, a network of survival built not from abundance, but from necessity. His men recycled shell casings, stretched medicine, grew vegetables underground. Their ingenuity was remarkable, yet it could not bridge the chasm between scarcity and abundance. In the end, abundance prevailed. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh had defeated tunnels carved by hand. Bulldozers, tanks, and flamethrowers had rendered futile the courage of men armed with bayonets. The battle became a case study in the future of warfare. Production and logistics would decide outcomes as surely as courage and tactics. After World War II, Iwo Jima's memory was appropriated into the emerging Cold War narrative. For the United States, the battle became evidence that free societies could outproduce and outlast authoritarian ones. Politicians and generals pointed to the flag atop Suribachi as proof that democracy's industrial base was its ultimate weapon. During the Korean War, the lessons of Iwo Jima resurfaced. American forces relied again on industrial abundance, artillery shells, aircraft, medical evacuation, to offset determined adversaries fighting from terrain as unforgiving as volcanic rock. In Vietnam, the lesson became more complicated. Abundance did not always guarantee victory when political legitimacy faltered. Yet even there, the shadow of Iwo Jima loomed, reminding planners that logistics were the skeleton upon which campaigns were built. For Japan, the Cold War transformed memory. The nation, stripped of empire, rebuilt itself as an industrial power aligned with the very democracy it had once opposed. Factories that once produced warplanes now produced automobiles and electronics, integrating Japan into the global order, shaped by American abundance. The memory of Iwo Jima lingered as tragedy, but it also marked the pivot point where Japan moved from militarism to productivity. The memory of Iwo Jima became layered with myth, commemoration, and silence. In America, Joe Rosenthal's photograph became immortal. It adorned stamps, posters, and eventually the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. The bronze monument depicting 6 men raising the flag became a pilgrimage site for Marines and civilians alike. It symbolized not only victory, but endurance, the belief that democracy, though costly, would prevail. Yet veterans often viewed the image with ambivalence. The photograph captured triumph, but it did not capture carnage. It immortalized 6 men, yet 3 of them would die within days. For survivors, the photo represented both pride and grief. It became a reminder of comrades who never returned, of letters home that would never be delivered. In Japan, memory took different forms. The island, renamed Kyoto, became a sacred site. Annual pilgrimages brought families of the dead to lay. Flowers at memorial shrines, the tunnels, many still sealed, remained tombs. Japanese memory emphasized mourning rather than triumph, sacrifice rather than victory. The figure of Kuribayashi emerged as tragic hero, an officer who fought with professionalism, who rejected suicidal waste, yet who remained bound to a cause. Doomed by scarcity, art and literature revisited the island. In 2006, Clint Eastwood's Letters from Iwo Jima gave Japanese voices to global audiences, reminding the world that the men in the tunnels were not faceless enemies, but fathers, sons, and brothers. The film revealed diaries, letters, and humanity buried beneath volcanic rock. In doing so, it bridged the gap between American abundance and Japanese scarcity, showing that both sides shared courage, fear, and loss. the survivors of Iwo Jima carried its weight across decades. Some Americans returned to build families, careers, and communities, their stories blending into the post-war boom. Others carried invisible scars, memories of tunnels lit by flamethrowers, of comrades vaporized by artillery, of nights when sleep brought volcanic sand back into lungs. For many, silence became the only language of remembrance. Japanese survivors faced different burdens. They returned to cities devastated by bombing, to families reduced by hunger, to a society that struggled to reconcile defeat. Some remained, silent out of shame, others out of grief. Letters written in tunnels were discovered decades later, revealing voices of men who never escaped. These letters spoke of duty, love, fear, and resignation. They revealed that beneath the uniform, the enemy was human. Civilian survivors carried perhaps the heaviest burdens. For nurses like the imagined Kyoko Tanaka, memory was measured in scarcity, bandages cut into strips, antiseptic diluted, rice measured by the grain. Their stories remained largely hidden, overshadowed by military narratives, yet they remind us that wars are never fought by soldiers alone. Iwo Jima remains a scar on the Pacific. Its black volcanic sands still bear traces of battle, rusting shells, collapsed tunnels, bones beneath the surface. The island, once a fortress, became a base for American forces for decades. Only later was it returned to Japan, though the memory of American sacrifice remains embedded in its soil. Today, the island is largely uninhabited, reserved for memorials and military exercises. Yet its silence speaks. Tourists, veterans, and descendants who visit stand on beaches where history condensed into fire and steel. The sand still clings to boots as it did to Private Miller in 1945. The tunnels remain dark as they did when Kuribayashi walked their length. The ultimate legacy of Iwo Jima lies in its revelation of how societies wage war. It was not merely a clash of soldiers, but a clash of systems, one defined by abundance, the other by scarcity. It revealed that industrial democracy, properly mobilized, could overwhelm authoritarian militarism, not just through numbers, but through efficiency, innovation, and resilience. Yet the battle also revealed the cost of such abundance. 6,800 American dead, 19,000 Japanese dead, 27,000 American wounded. Scarcity may have lost, but abundance paid dearly for victory. In the Cold War, these lessons shaped strategy. Abundance became deterrence, scarcity became vulnerability. Nuclear stockpiles, missile silos, aircraft carriers, all emerged from the lesson that production and logistics determined survival. Yet Iwo Jima also warned of cost. Victory would never come cheaply, even for the abundant. As decades pass, the battle shifts from history to memory, from memory to meaning. For Americans, it symbolizes sacrifice, unity, and the power of free societies. For Japanese, it symbolizes tragedy, resilience, and the futility of militarism. For the world, it symbolizes the transformation of warfare, from courage measured in sword strokes to courage measured in production statistics. The flag atop Suribachi remains eternal, yet its meaning has deepened. It represents not only victory but sacrifice, not only abundance but cost. It reminds us that wars are fought by individuals even when decided by systems, that courage and loss coexist in every crater, every tunnel, every letter home. Private. Jack Miller's letters, whether imagined or real, stand for thousands of voices that try to capture the incomprehensible. Kyoko Tanaka's diary, whether imagined or real, stands for civilians whose survival stories often go unheard. Kuribayashi's strategy stands for professional duty entwined with futility. Together, they remind us that history is not abstract, it is human. 70 years later, veterans return to Iwo Jima for commemorations, some bent to scoop a handful of black sand. holding it in wrinkled hands as tears blurred their vision. For them, the sand carried memory heavier than stone. It was the texture of youth, lost, of comrades buried, of history endured. For new generations, the sand carries lessons. Abundance can prevail, but it must be mobilized wisely. Scarcity breeds ingenuity, but it cannot indefinitely resist overwhelming production. Democracy, when defended with unity, can transform factories and farms into weapons of liberation. The island remains silent now, its tunnels mostly sealed, its peaks scarred but stable. Yet silence is deceptive. Beneath the surface lie bones, letters, and echoes. They remind us that the cost of freedom is measured not only in strategy and production, but in blood and memory. The battle for Iwo Jima was more than a fight for an island. It was a confrontation between two visions of society, two philosophies of war, two measures of human will. It demonstrated that abundance, industrial, logistical, democratic, could overcome scarcity no matter how disciplined or courageous. Yet it also demonstrated that abundance demands sacrifice, that every victory carries grief. The flag on Suribachi remains one of history's most enduring images. But its true meaning lies not in bronze statues or photographs. It lies in the letters of Marines, in the diaries of Japanese defenders, in the whispered prayers of civilians underground. It lies in the recognition that victory and tragedy are inseparable, that abundance and scarcity define not only war, but human existence. Iwo Jima endures as symbol and scar, as triumph and tragedy. Its legacy is not merely military, it is human. It reminds us that freedom, though abundant, is never free, that courage, though scarce, is never forgotten, and that beneath every victory lies the eternal question, was the cost worth the sand? It's secured. If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.